Hey Masters of Speed, it's Terramaster, and welcome to a deck profile video from me. I usually don't do these because I don't usually play, so I don't usually have any results with any deck to show off, but this past weekend there was a Remote Duel Extravaganza. I did play in that, and I did get second place in one of the giant cards, and the deck I used is Crystal Beast, so I'm going to just show that to you right now. Starting with the skill, you can see the boy on the mat here as well. That is one Aster Phoenix skill, and that is looking into the future. This is definitely the best skill right now if you want to play Crystal Beasts. So do that, and that's because, you know, you'll see, the deck doesn't really rely on the spell cards much, which is the only restriction on the skill, really. So let's start with the main deck. We got our monster cards first. So we do 3 copies of Crystal Beast Sapphire Pegasus. This is your ace monster. This is the monster you want to open. If you don't open it, you want to use looking to see it as quickly as possible. The games where I drew Pegasus plus Trap, I felt almost unbeatable. Obviously, I did lose some games where that happened, but it's a pretty good win rate. All right, moving on. We have 3 copies of our second Crystal Beast. That is Crystal Beast Topaz Tiger. Topaz Tiger is really solid because it gains 400 attack points when it attacks, giving you a 2,000 beater essentially on your turn. This turned out to be useful in a lot of situations, beating over things like Volcanic Rocket, Breakers, right? Breakers even with counter, that actually came up too, where Breaker with counter was left on the field for my turn. So Topaz Tiger is very solid as your second Crystal Beast so that you have 6, the deck can actually function. Next we have 2 copies of DD Warrior Lady. Now, this used to be 3. However, I was convinced by some other players in the community who are very good with Crystal Beasts. Shout out to Dino Bones for not necessarily requiring 3 DD Warrior Lady. And that's kind of, you'll see what I use my third limit 3 slot on. All right, here's one of my texts. So I couldn't figure out what the 20th card in the deck should be. So I ended up deciding on Sphere Karibo. This was actually quite useful in one of the matches I won. It saved me from losing. I think it was against a Dragoon deck. It actually saved me from losing a game. So Sphere Karibo can be very useful for any kind of deck that wants to aggressively finish you off. So really good there. And you'll notice this as a trend. I built my deck, both main and side really, which I'll go over in the end, why that was correct or incorrect, to specifically counter aggro decks. So that's why the Sphere Karibo, right? Cyber Dragon was another option I considered. Now remember, I did not have Midterm Paradox physically yet when this happened, so that cards in that set were not an option for me. So it was between Sphere and Cyber Dragon for me. I have 1 copy of Book of Moon. There's my third limit 3 slot. This is another tech. It's a better answer to things that are too high for you to attack, specifically to Jinzo, than Warrior Lady, because Warrior Lady can sometimes be a pretty slow answer. Speaking of fast answers to Jinzo, Sphere was one as well, but here's another one, Berserk Scales. Berserk Scales is really flexible because it's proactive or reactive. Again, you can't activate the same turn you use looking to the future, but if you have Berserk Skills and your play is to activate it during your battle phase and damage step, then don't use looking that turn. Because you're stacking 3, you should be okay for that 1 turn to not need it, right? So that's another one of my texts. I will say this, maybe came up once. If there's any card I had to cut, it would probably be Berserk Skills. It didn't seem to come up all that often, and I cited it out a few times too. So maybe that's the cut. All right, moving on to the trap cards. We got 3 copies of Crystal Conclave. This is your best trap. The floating effect is actually just as good sometimes as the bounce effect. And obviously the bounce effect is absurd. So Conclave, obviously. I personally like 3 copies of Crystal Raigeki. And that's because in the format we're in now, spot removal, which is so hard to find, and not just bouncing your monsters back to the hand like Conclave does, but spot removal to remove your opponent's card, not just monster, card off the field, whether that's a face-up monster, a face-down monster, a face-up or face-down spell trap, it doesn't matter. Just the flexibility of this card is absurd, and you don't run 3 necessarily to see 3 copies of it, although in the stall matchups, I do want to see 3 copies throughout the duel, but you run 3 copies, so you're guaranteed to see one and sometimes 2 of them if the duel goes long enough. Finally, you have 3 copies of Dust Tornado to close it out. Now, primarily, that's why Raigeki, I said, will be used for monster removal, and Dust Tornado is there for your back row hate. So that's the main deck, and now I'm going to go into the side deck, and you'll really see why I'm saying that I built for aggro. All right, I'll have 3 copies of Waking the Dragon. 3. I'm going all in against stopping the aggressive decks like Ojama OTK, like decks that's consistently summoned monsters bigger than mine. There's 7s now. There's Cyber Darks. There's Beatdown. But Beatdown doesn't really target your back row that much. But those other decks are going to try to blindly hit your back row. Gaia, right? So, which I actually played against and didn't win, but Waking almost got me there. It did help me win game 2. But that's not the point. This is heavily sided for aggro decks, right? Speaking of, you have Mind Crush, which also sides against those aggro decks as well. Although this is the one where I would say maybe I would cut one Mind Crush to have another anti-stall card here. And perhaps something in the main deck too that helps me beat stall, since I took 2 losses to stall, one to Giant Rat stall and one to TP Volcanic stall. I lost 2 games to deck out, and that's just something that you shouldn't have happen to you. So that's my fault. I got to be more prepared for that. I would also cut the Waking in the side from 3 to 2 and do something anti-stall with that as well. And then obviously the last card is an anti-stall card. I did side 1. That is Jinzo. But again, it wasn't enough to get me through all the stall matchups I had to go against. So yeah, it turns out Crystal Beast not only has the weakness of very aggressive OTK type decks, but also has some weakness against extremely stally decks. If you can't out-resource them in the early game, your monsters just aren't big enough to do enough damage to push through quickly. And that's kind of the problem there. So obviously there's new stuff in the new box, a box I'd like to use to try to improve this deck, and especially the side deck, things like Droroid, right? So we'll see how much that helps against stall. If I ever find success with a newer version of Crystal Beast, I'll obviously be right back here for you. We had 2 copies of Destiny and Dragoon as I'm moving to the extra deck without saying anything. Now, this is only because I couldn't find my copy of Arcana Knight Joker. I'm pretty sure I own one. I just couldn't find it. So I was like, whatever. I love Dragoon, so 2 Dragoon it is. Then you have 1 copy of Cyber End Dragon. This is because I don't own a Blue Eyes Ultimate, and that's what most people seem to prefer. Because of 500 extra attack points, it is attacking for game more often than not. Thousand Eyes Restrict is, just if you want to turn the game into a stun stall game, if that's what favors you, right? And with Conclave, it's obviously flexible when you want to get rid of the Thousand Eyes Restrict. Ryu Senshi, obviously, to negate their battle traps and things like that. And finally, Ojama King, where if this is summoned at the right moment, this is against the Gaia match I had. I did lose the match, but in the game, I did win game 2. My opponent did hit a Waking. I was able to summon Ojama King and insta-win the game because I locked out their zones. Can't summon Gaia. That deck basically doesn't function. But alright, that's all I had. I hope you found this insightful, and I hope you can take this build, which is already decent, and improve it even further. I think Crystal Beasts aren't going anywhere. I think it's just a matter of what proper tech cards to use and how you balance the addressing the overly losing to the overly aggro decks versus losing to the overly stally decks, and kind of which direction you build your deck in. Like, except for that one Gaia match, I didn't really lose to an aggro deck, right? Like, I was able to beat everyone who was trying to attack me for game, but I did lose to like a hard counter over the full weekend. I played it twice. So I did lose to a hard counter, which is why I got second, not first, which is Banisher, right? Deck profile coming on this channel very soon, by the way, this week. And then I lost to Stall. So, yeah, but that's all I got. Oh, I actually didn't, I'm so sorry. I didn't lose to Gaia with this deck. I lost to Gaia playing Beatdown. Wow, that's like, I spent like 2 minutes in the video talking about that. Yeah, this deck should not lose to Gaia. That was purely a misremembrance on my part because I played Crystal Beast 2 days and I played Beatdown the third day. And the Beatdown day was when I lost to Gaia because Gaia just out aggroes Beatdown, which Beatdown I guess can't handle. But I'll let Justice and Drake talk more about Beatdown when they do their deck profiles later in the week. But yeah, that was Crystal Beast. So like I said, I built it for aggro and it did very good against aggro decks specifically. So take what you can and adjust it as you can for stall using new midterm cards or old cards, whatever, right? But yeah, the problem this deck has is stall. So with that warning, before you go using this deck, net decking it, try to improve it a little bit, all right? I obviously will too. So if I ever do improve it, I will see you for that. But until then, the Terramaster out.